Welcome, guys. Welcome, everyone, to the Proof of DeSci Twitter space and actually podcast series by ValleyDAO, where we highlight real people, real research, real impact from the world on this of decentralized science. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing quantum biology, BioHackathon, AI agents, and much more. And we're asking a question, most importantly, that's been floating around lately: is DeSci dead, or is it just evolving? We've got some incredible guests and speakers and builders and thinkers joining us today. So please welcome Geoff from Quantum Biology DAO. Please welcome Erik from Bioprotocol, and please welcome Morgan from ValleyDAO. My name's Tom. I'll be your host for today, and we're going to be diving into everything from the quantum microscope to autonomous AI agents and how these tools are reshaping how science is done. If you're curious about the future of science, you're in the right place, so let's get into it. Guys, I'm pleased to welcome you all, and I'm super excited to have you all here. And just because Erik's actually on a kind of tight schedule today, and he's going to be with us for the first half of the show, some of my initial questions are going to be directed to Erik, if you guys don't mind. So, Erik, if you can tell us a little bit more about Bioprotocol, because it's one of the most interesting experiments, I would call it experiment, in autonomous science. Can you explain how your AI agents fit into the future of research, and what's your take on this?
Yeah, happy to. And just want to say I'm very grateful to be invited, especially alongside folks like Morgan and Geoff from MicroDAO and Quantum BioDAO, respectively. Morgan, it's been hilarious watching so many of your posts on Twitter. The sense of humor is just on point. And Geoff, the thing that y'all posted the other day, walking through the lab space, I actually had to put my phone down for a second and just take a second and go, wow, the cow. This was funded by decentralized science. So, I mean, I've been in the wider ecosystem for quite a bit now, and I cannot tell you how many empty conference rooms I've presented to over the past 3 years, where it's 10 people, 10 really good people. And it's just continued to grow ever since. So, Geoff, seeing that Twitter post was definitely a moment of triumph for folks in the space, more than I think you realized. So, just wanted to first off, start out by expressing gratitude for the chance to be on the space and talk a little bit about the BioXAI Hackathon. We are seeing incredible progress in the world of academic research in every facet of the world, but more specifically knowledge work, thanks to the emergence of large language models and artificial intelligence systems in general. We have seen quite a few different foundational models that have started coming out. Folks like Future House have been hard at work integrating knowledge with remote cloud labs and trying to find ways for an end-to-end idea to patent pipeline for information on the scientific record. I personally have worked prior more in the open access side of decentralized science, so the Research Hub, DeSci Labs of the world, and I am a huge data management nerd. I very firmly believe that the way that we structure information has to be as precise as the science which is underpinning it. So a lot of work on controlled vocabularies, ontologies, knowledge graphs, things along those lines as a complement to existing LLMs. So this BioXAI Hackathon is in many ways a continuation of that work. So what we would like to see coming out of it, eventually I guess the goal of BioXAI is trying to find meaningful ways to help automate parts of the research pipeline. So we want to see more agentic resources in BioDAOs, helping out with lit review, helping out with proposal review, helping to uncover hidden gems in the scientific record, which have never been seen before. One of my personal mentors, Dr. Baron Molns, did a lot of work about 15 years ago on hypothesis generation via knowledge graphs. And a lot of the work that he did was centered around the idea that there are parts that the scientific record is not random. In a lot of ways, it's deterministic. So ultimately, the reason people get scooped is because the technology to measure a certain phenomenon finally gets good enough at a point in time where people can run an experiment on an idea that they've had. And that you can actually trace this kind of, this flow of knowledge as it moves across time in a way where you can see concepts converging. Where, let's say, quantum mechanics and biology 20 years ago, no one would ever mention them in the same manuscript. And then 10 years ago, maybe the first person ever put the two things in a manuscript together at the same time. And then all of a sudden, at a certain point, there's enough critical mass that if you find a human being clever enough to connect the dots, diligent enough to read all of the papers, they go, hey, there might be something to quantum mechanics and biology. I should start looking into this. A lot of potential behind behind those hidden gems on the scientific record. And at Bioprotocol, that's one of the things that we want to find is some of the equivalents to some of the folks who are up on stage at the moment. Now, with agentic resources coming in hot and heavy across all different domains, we have the ability to compute additional complexity or to comprehend additional complexity. How about that? LLMs elevate our ability to understand data and to interact with data. A knowledge graph being a more machine actionable structure for information gives us the ability to spot many of these different contradictions. So the hackathon itself is a chance to do some of the basics and some of the more complicated things. We've got several different BioDAOs that we're working with. SpineDAO put up a track, CerebrumDAO put up a track, VitaDAO put up a track of things that they would like to see work on, which ranges from everything around taking archives from, or taking manuscripts from the French archives and trying to find techniques and concepts in spine surgery that have been overlooked, to proposal and preprint review with VitaDAO, and a whole bunch of stuff in between. I personally took a lot of inspiration on some of the tracks from my mechanical engineering degree, where, the best professors were always the ones who would give you homework problems in Cartesian on an XY grid, and then on the test, they would give you the homework problem in polar to see which students actually learn the concepts. So we have a couple other tracks that take inspiration from that basic idea and really try to test people on the way that they are building knowledge graphs in the first place to see if they have found a more robust way of structuring information. So one thing I would love to see is whether or not hackers can meaningfully predict null results, which were never published in the literature. If you can take an agentic resource and ask them to train on information from, let's say, 2010 to 2015 in a very specific subfield, and then ask it to recommend the hypotheses that it thinks would be present in 2016. All of a sudden, you can go back, more than likely, is a hypothesis on my end, you can go back, look through the resources, and say, okay, 80% of the LLM's predictions did turn into a manuscript within the next 3 years. 20 or 10% of them didn't make any sense, or, just the LLMs disagreed with each other if you had LLMs actually training. But that there was a very small subset of hypotheses, which all LLMs agreed should exist, but never actually came up in the literature. That, to me, represents a certain precision, a certain move towards deterministic outcomes from agentic resources, which would show that we have made meaningful progress on the way that we're structuring knowledge graphs in the first place. So to close it out, the hackathon has $125,000 in prizes. Solana is one of the main sponsors. We have assembled a world-class panel of judges who have given access to pretty much every academic resource you can possibly imagine, from opening up Harvard Dataverse and many of the Dutch academic Royal Libraries resources to pre-tailored knowledge graphs built by academics themselves. So really excited to see what comes out of this, but the kickoff was today and yesterday, and we're going to be continuing to push to get hackers on board to solve problems both that BioDAOs have and that we think that they will have in the future. So with that being said, it's a whole long rant with a lot of information. Would love to know if anyone has questions.
That's absolutely amazing. Thank you, Erik, so much for this overview. That's Erik live from the BioHackathon, guys. Quantum Biology's got a question, I think.
Yeah, Erik, that was great to hear about. And, of course, hi, everyone. I'm Geoff from the Quantum Biology DAO. We care about quantum biology, which is the proposition that biology actually runs on quantum. Listening to you talk about what AI agents could do, and in particular around hypothesis generation, if AIs are able to generate good new hypotheses, that's obviously something that could accelerate science more. And so thinking about this in the context of quantum biology, basically we have been especially interested at the DAO in the effects of weak magnetic fields. So if there are quantum effects in biology, how does it work? Well, one of the mechanisms is through a thing called electron spin superposition that makes it possible for organisms to actually respond biologically to very weak magnetic fields. Now, the thing I just described, though, is there's sort of a stack of mechanisms. You have biological function, and then you apply a weak magnetic field, and then there's some underlying effect. The reason that we think that this is quantum is that essentially the classical explanations don't seem to be good enough. They don't seem to make sense here, but there actually are a bunch of there are other possibilities. And, we've been mostly looking at the idea that it's electron spin superpositions underlying weak magnetic field effects. But recently I came across a hypothesis that might explain the same thing using electron tunneling. And there's more specifics about how that works. But my question for you was so let's say that we at the Quantum Biology DAO would like to have people at the hackathon help us generate alternate hypotheses for what are the potential mechanisms that underlie weak magnetic fields. Is that the sort of thing that we could do through the hackathon? How do we do that?
All right. First off, that is really cool science. And I've been meaning, once work slows down a little bit from organizing events and gathering judges and everything, huge fan of the community that you're building and would actually really and truly love to learn more. So to answer that question, I would have to think about it a little bit. But I think it's something that we could definitely fit into the event with the understanding that, a lot of hackers, the very first inclination of a hacker is to come in and make the biggest, meatiest knowledge graph they can and to generate as many hypotheses as possible. Whenever in reality, what y'all probably want at Quantum Biology DAO is 20 different hypotheses, which have enough differentiation between them to explain different possible meaningful solutions. I would have to think a little bit more about exactly how we do this. I think the starting point is just make it a Zotero. Give us either information, let's say data from Dataverse. So let me start that over. Make a Zotero with all of the information that you think could potentially contain the answer for hackers to start forming knowledge graphs out of them. And it is manuscripts, but I think to a certain extent, it's also the data underpinning some of this information. So one of the judges who's in the hackathon is the lead knowledge graph research and development engineer for Harvard Dataverse. And he's basically opened up the entirety of Harvard Dataverse to us as hackers to use. He's also created some really interesting pathways for agentic resources to chat directly with data sets in a way that uses controlled vocabularies on top of the data. So there's a level of precision involved. It's not just hallucinations, where an agentic resource can understand the actual context and the subsequent relationships around that context for any field in a tabular data set. So I would also say if you could collect information from Harvard or from the Harvard Dataverse, that would be another cool one. Yeah. I think the biggest thing is kind of combining resources. We can get together after this and maybe find a way to get the track posted for hackers, potentially do some PR work around it and host an office hours or two on the Discord. One of the things that we would have to ask from you in doing that is a little bit of your time to review the hypotheses at the end. As Geoff, I don't know that there are many other people in the world reviewing a hypothesis on quantum biology.
Happy to do that. And in fact, the more data-heavy angle, I believe, is being explored by Stanley Bishop with Smarter with Science, whom we work with. And so that one approach.
Oh, is that the protein bank one?
I haven't been tracking that one myself. That one's Clarice Aiello. We have 3 co-founders at the Quantum Biology DAO, myself, Clarice, and Alessandro. But Clarice has been more focused on that. The thing I'm interested in is, can we give you a big stack of papers, and from those papers, the LLMs can pull out a new hypothesis? And if so, I'd be happy to spend time reviewing the hypotheses. That's the whole point. We want to get good hypotheses at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that that's something we can do. And there's probably a couple rounds of iteration in there where hackers have to continue to refine, because making an ontology, which is what I would hope is underlying all of this, is as much as an art as it is a science. But yeah, if y'all are willing to give the resources for hackers to train on and a little bit of your time to help them course correct, that would be fantastic.
Great. Thanks for the answer.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And Morgan, the co-founder of ValleyDAO, I know that Albert's at the BioHackathon at the moment. Do you have any insights from him, maybe? What's been happening? What's going on there?
So, I mean, in terms of specifics, and so we're yeah, I guess the short story is we're entering a team through the community, which is great. And I'm excited to get stuck in there myself as well. But yeah, I haven't been able to attend physically. So those guys are over there collecting data, collecting knowledge, speaking to people, and really figuring out how we can kind of adapt something that we've been working on already for the scope of the hackathon, and make it, of course, interesting, impactful, and also aligned with our core mission and goals in terms of what we've been working on. So specifics are TBD. I think we'll have a much clearer picture next week once we've had a chance to really dig in and chat and figure out where we want to go with it. But yeah, I mean, I can speak on the high level things that we prioritize internally and the things that we care about a lot for this hackathon in particular. Usability was one of the things that we read on the judging criterion, is something that we're obsessed with. I think in DeSci, but also just more generally in science, lots of tools get built, and very useful tools, very complex tools, things that do crazy things, but typically they're built by researchers, first of all, and people that maybe don't have this kind of mindset of making something usable or having a nice interface, or, kind of optimizing the superficial things. And I say superficial in kind of air quotes because they're not superficial at all. They dictate how we interact with the software and how we can actually use it and how many people can use it, because sometimes things are just not accessible at all. So yeah, this is like something that we've been kind of holding core to everything that we've been building with AI, and really trying to abstract away as much of the complexity as possible without removing the kind of art and fun to it, if that makes sense. So, we want to build things that anyone can pick up and use, and ideally, like, anyone that just has motivation, right? Like, this was kind of the big promise of one of the big promises of BioDAOs in general, was like everyone can participate in science. We haven't quite got there yet, because science is just intrinsically inaccessible in the format that it is communicated, in the way that it is conducted, where it is conducted, et cetera, et cetera. So, the things we want to build are things that anyone can pick up and use and have a significant impact with, but also something that a world-leading expert could similarly use and also find their own value and way of using it. So we want to abstract things away and make them usable, but without making it, like, there's a lot of software out there that makes things very, very usable, but then a developer comes along and they're like, well, I hate this because I can't, change the preferences or settings on this thing, and that makes it very inaccessible to the kind of slightly more skilled or more complex audience. So yeah, I guess that's just some high level thoughts on where we're thinking about going with it. Yeah, there's a lot to be built.
Absolutely. And I'm completely with you on that. It gets very, very challenging. Like, UI UX is a very difficult job to do well. Anyone can build an interface, especially with tools like Lovable now. It's the barrier to making something beautiful has significantly lowered. But making something which is actually truly useful, easy to use, and intuitive is still an art form in a large sense. So, you've always got kind of these two contrasting perspectives. One of them being, we'll call it professorware, where, it's someone who had an idea, who wanted to make an MVP, who wanted to test it, and is then going to move on to the next MVP once they feel like they have successfully made it. And that's the deal with software within academia. And in its own right, that's beautiful. There's nothing wrong with professorware. You just have to realize that it's professorware. And to your point, Morgan, this is not something that everyone can access. I think a lot of the foundational knowledge graph concepts are things that are very important, are very impactful, but will continue to have a certain level of abstraction required for someone who's not a technical person. In the same way that LLMs, at least as we intuitively imagine them, are not necessarily the underlying network graph. It's the simple chat GPT interface, right? Ask a question, and that's all it is. So there are definitely different levels to go at this. Building the right foundation for information, especially as we're thinking about each of these BioDAOs as having the opportunity to have its own endowment, to start to build a community, to start to invest in a community. The map to impact is the most immediate part, but I completely agree with you that eventually anything that gets built needs to be turned around and pointed towards a more user-centric focus as something that a BioDAO community can use. Couldn't agree more.
Awesome, guys. Thank you. And Erik, I know you'll need to drop off very, very soon. So in one sentence, what do you think, in your personal opinion, what kind of outcomes you're hoping to see from this year's BioHackathon?
One sentence is hard. I hope to see hackers who start working with data structures that are better suited to the concepts and the precision required of academic research. I hope to see meaningful impact given to BioDAOs and kind of the beginnings of a map to impact. I hope to see an open source AI community continue to develop in the bio ecosystem and for us to attract the kind of gigabrain nerds that really care about scientific research.
Amazing. And my final question to you, Erik, is DeSci dead? Because that's what a lot of people have been saying. We're here to prove that it's obviously not.
Bro, absolutely not. I cannot tell you how many times I've been asked that question. No, DeSci is not dead. It's a bull market, it's a bear market, and that's a part of life. But ultimately, this is the best time to build. This is the time whenever we focus on refining the products, on getting back to the fundamentals, and building quality science and putting it on chain in a way that is well enough organized for it to be safe and secure for future generations. No, DeSci is not dead.
100%. Erik, thank you so much for answering those questions. Okay, let's move on to quantum biology, because I also have some questions. Geoff, can you give us an overview of what Quantum BioDAO is currently working on?
Absolutely. And thanks again for having me here. So I gave a really brief overview before of quantum biology, the proposition that biology is actually depending in an important way on the laws of quantum physics. The DAO itself is involved in a number of different interesting initiatives, or taking a bunch of different steps. So the very first sort of priority for the DAO has been the funding of the creation of a particular microscope. We've had some debate over whether it should be called a quantum microscope, but essentially there is an optical microscope that can be built. People have built something like this before, but just not putting the components together in the right way, but that will allow us to detect whether quantum events are occurring inside cells at room temperature for long enough to be biologically relevant. The thing that it's like, why is quantum biology just breaking through now? Why was it, people have been talking about, the possibility of quantum effects in biology for more than 50 years? The answer is that while there is a lot of evidence for there being quantum effects in biology, and people may be familiar with photosynthesis as one of them that's thought to work by means of noise-assisted processes. The most famous is birds navigating using the Earth's magnetic field, where the postulated mechanism there is quantum. There's been evidence for essentially widespread or even ubiquitous quantum effects in biology, but all of that evidence has been correlative. It's been that people have seen effects and they're not exactly sure how to explain them apart from a quantum mechanism. What we're doing by funding the quantum microscope is setting up what the microscope will allow us to do is to directly observe quantum effects. I mean, you observe them by means of observing a fluorescence pattern. The fluorescence pattern has this little squiggle in it. It's called a Rabi oscillation, that if you can measure how long that lasts, the classical assumption has been that quantum effects are too brief, too fleeting to actually have an effect in biology. But that's an interesting assumption. And there's all of this ambient evidence of quantum effects in biology. So what we're planning to do is to actually measure how long certain quantum effects are lasting inside the environment of the cell at room temperature. And if we find that part one is see whether it's lasting long enough to be biologically relevant, and then step two, tie that to function. If we can do both of those, that will provide very, very solid evidence that quantum effects actually really are important in biology. So that's the first priority of the DAO has been funding this. So there's actually an entire ecosystem around quantum biology. Check out quantumbiology.eco to see the ecosystem. And the work on the microscope is being done by the Quantum Biology Institute. So the Institute is a regular California nonprofit. It's located in LA. It's a satellite lab in Maryland. But this has just been set up over the last couple months. The Institute is starting specific planning and construction of the microscope essentially this week. But, and then the DAO has been the primary funder of these efforts. So that's item number one. Then another thing is that in order to help we think that in fact there are ubiquitous effects in biology that are quantum. Well, why have biologists not been studying them? In some cases, they don't know how. The instrumentation isn't available. We have been working to translate I like to joke that the reason this hasn't shown up before is that biologists don't like math and the physicists don't like squishy things. And so we can't get them together and look at the actual intersection of the fields. We're working on one hand to translate the quantum concepts without loss of precision in a way that makes it so that not just biologists, but actually regular people can understand. So if it's of relevance, I can explain to you how a superposition works. I can explain spin and in a way that a regular person can understand. So there's this translation so as to make it so that quantum physics is no longer off-putting and is now understandable. The other thing is developing the instrumentation that's needed for biologists to study quantum effects. Now, the microscope is a true quantum instrument. It's complicated, costs more than $1 million. I think the microscope by itself is nearly $1 million. If you just add up all the prices for the parts, that's obviously very expensive. But if what you're studying is weak magnetic field effects, then for that, very simple instruments are possible. You can get a magnetic ring. It's called a Hallback array. But these allow you to apply a uniform magnetic field to a sample. And so let's say you want to see how cells develop under different levels of different presence or absence of magnetic field. That's actually very easy to do, but it's hard for biologists to know what to do in order to produce a uniform magnetic field of a particular level and how to check, have we produced the relevant magnetic field and so forth. So another thing that the DAO is doing is developing the instrumentation. This will, of course, be a revenue stream for the DAO, but we're developing instrumentation so that it becomes much easier for biologists to start investigating these effects themselves. That's the second thing. And then we've tons of stuff going on. So I'll mention a third. The third has to do with DAO governance. So as a DAO, it's community centric. It's a tokenocracy. So the final decisions are made by token voting. We have a token, QBio. It's available on Uniswap and Radium. We have our governance set up in 3 stages, where in the first stage, proposals are drafted in our Discord. People who are interested in joining, quantumbiology.community is a link that takes you to the Discord. Then after proposals are drafted, they go for public discussion. We've been using common.xyz as a platform. And there's public discussion and voting that's not token weighted. And then finally, things that pass that go into Snapshot, snapshot.box, which allows for token voting. That was working very well. And then recently we found that we hadn't ruled out the possibility of things like people creating multiple accounts and so forth. And we found some irregularities in some of the votes. So we deactivated the second phase of DAO governance. And now there's a question of how do we turn it back on and make it so that we continue the process of decentralization and make it easy for more people to be involved. One interesting challenge, and we'll see whether we nail this challenge now or whether we get to it soon, but there's a big difference between large token holders and small token holders. Some people have the means to come in and purchase a large number. We know of a couple cases where, in fact, individuals or small groups have purchased large amounts of the token. And as far as we know, they're aligned with the mission of the DAO and so forth, but that gives them a larger say. Then you have smaller token holders who don't have the relevant means. And then there's a question, well, how do you make sure that everyone's voice is actually heard and everything is taken into account? So we're hoping to strike the balance, and that's something we're going to be talking about over the next week or so.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this, Geoff. Morgan, of course, if you've got any questions or if there's anything you'd like to say or ask Geoff, feel free to jump in. We've got Albert here on the stage. If you've got time, if you want to join us and become a speaker, please just raise your hand and I'll be super glad to invite you in. Geoff, that is absolutely amazing. And the quantum microscope project has actually been gaining some attention recently. That's insane, and I would love to ask you so much about that. But probably, what do you think in terms of the changes to not just DeSci, but obviously on the scientific front, because it's such a big kind of enterprise frontier that you're working on here. What excites you the most about the potential impact of it?
Well, I guess there's two sides to what I'm sort of most excited about. There's on the scientific side, and these end up being related, but there's biology is still, despite all of our efforts, a big mystery. It's a lot of complexity. As you learn about how much we know about biology, there's so much we still don't know. I've come to think that biology is still importantly a black box. So then I think there's a lot of work that's happening, good work, trying to work out more specific mechanisms inside the current paradigm. The current paradigm explains things primarily mechanically, so things bumping into each other, shapes of proteins and so forth. Things can also be explained chemically. But there's a question about whether there is some factor that's missing entirely from these explanations. This would be not just an incremental advance on previous research, but an actual revolutionary step forward. I expect personally, actually, that biology is really sufficiently complex that there are going to be several of these here. But the one that we're focusing on at the Quantum Biology DAO is the effect of weak magnetic fields. There's a particular link the mechanisms are not worked out here, but it has classically been assumed that you need to have strong magnetic fields in order to have an effect. People have, for that reason, thought that the Earth's magnetic field doesn't really matter. Astronauts being outside of the Earth's magnetic field won't have any sort of effect on them, but there's actually a lot of evidence that we've gathered some evidence ourselves that organisms are responding to the presence of the Earth's magnetic field, that the absence of that has an impact. There's a concern that this actually is affecting astronauts. It's not just microgravity that affects them, but it may be the hypomagnetic condition. But so then with weak magnetic fields, people assume that if there's an effect, it's going to have to be small, and that the effect will get larger if you make the magnetic field stronger. There are mechanisms. So the mechanism that we've looked at in particular is one involving electron spin superpositions. And this mechanism has a sweet spot. It may actually in biology have multiple sweet spots, but these are occurring down at the very low level. This is as strong as your cell phone, but is as weak as your cell phone and weaker. The Earth's magnetic field is actually much weaker than the magnetic field produced by people's cell phones. So there's this sweet spot where a particular quantum effect can occur. And if we can show that this is actually happening, this is an entirely new causal explanatory factor that can be used in biology. And so I think about that as revolutionary. I think it'll be a revolutionary step forward. So that's what I'm excited about on the science side. The application side, it's hard to predict in advance exactly what the effects are going to look like, but there's evidence that weak magnetic fields affect many aspects of cellular function. Cellular respiration is one, rate of DNA repair. And so you can imagine a future where we've figured out how the weak magnetic fields affect people. It's, we know, you want this amplitude and you want, this particular direction and shape and pattern of application. But you can imagine a future where you have smart clothing. The clothing has small actuators or the ability to apply weak magnetic fields, so essentially small magnets. The whole thing is attached to your cell phone so that you can open up an app and turn on something that affects the rate of, maybe it affects your metabolism, maybe it affects how well you sleep, maybe it makes it so that your body heals more quickly, and then you could select between different apps, different applications based on what you wanted the magnetic fields to do. And then, because it's non-invasive, it's cheap, and could be done through controlled through a cell phone in this way, you can imagine a future where, as scientists work out better what are the magnetic fields that help our body, it's then possible to have the scientific breakthrough occurs, the information is sent out over the air, and people are getting the ability to better manage their own health just automatically and at low cost. So that's a future that I imagine, and then to get there, have to get the place where the scientific community has gotten stuck is on whether, so there's all this evidence of the effects of weak magnetic fields. The best explanations for these are quantum, but and rightfully within the context of science, the scientists want to see direct confirmation that you can actually have quantum events, quantum effects lasting for long enough inside cells at room temperature. So the microscope will let us do that. And so if this all ends up being right, we'll make the observations, and that's going to be scientific history.
Nice. You've been drawing me into the vision of the future of quantum biology DAO, and I started actually daydreaming about the potentials of what you guys can achieve. So this is super interesting. This is super exciting. But I bet there's been some challenges, and that's the question actually to both of you, to Geoff, to Morgan from ValleyDAO. What do you think so far? What were the biggest challenges? What are the biggest advantages of building science tools, scientific tools, and research infrastructure in Web3?
I mean, that's a great question. I'll take a stab at it. So we have found that there are all sorts of surprising benefits from having a community involved. And then the interacting with being a token and having all these people who care about so many different things happening, I think there's this challenge, and I think we've done this really well so far, but there's this challenge of helping people to see the vision and to stay focused on advancing the science and bridging all the way through to commercialization, even while there are things going on. So example things we've encountered. So we did our fundraise. That went great. This was in December, raised $6.8 million, the largest DeSci raise, and that was excellent. We launched our token in January. The token crashed, so we had to manage that. Then we more recently, markets are down, people are talking about bear markets and so forth. And so with, ETH down, diminishes the amount of available capital we have in the treasury. And then there's this possibility, how long is this going to last? And so the challenge is keeping everyone on board and positively contributing and having a sufficiently realistic and optimistic mindset despite dealing with these sorts of challenges. I think we've done really well so far. The ones I mentioned were all token related challenges. I mentioned earlier a governance challenge. So we had a exploit available in our governance, which made it so people could do double voting. We're going to fix that. But yeah, so I think that essentially it's like doing a project in Web3 for scientists who haven't done this. I think it's as new as running a startup if you have no startup experience. It's like there are all of these new things you'd have to do, except it's in a sort of alternate world where it is a startup, but it's also using all of these different platforms. You have to like learn about hard wallets. You have to, understand what DAO raters are. There are so many different things that you have to wrap your mind around, and you're interacting with you're interacting with a scientific community on one side, and you're interacting with the crypto community, and there's some overlap, but the mentality, you've got some people in science who are, afraid of crypto. You got people in crypto who are there for, it's often hard to tell what's happening. And so it's an enormous challenge, but I mean, I love it. I think it's a great opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Morgan, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're a little bit further down the road than QBio, right? So we definitely faced all of these challenges, and that doesn't mean that we're over them, but I think it's like a chronic pain. Like we're just living with it now, and we know how to manage it, and we know what we're dealing with for the most part. Of course, macro market conditions are not ideal at the moment, but we've been through ups and downs before, and we're feeling pretty reassured that there are greener pastures ahead and brighter days ahead. But I'd say like our challenges at the moment are more on the, I want to say, execution. And what I mean by that is like we have raised money both for the DAO and for individual projects. So now it's more about, balancing the execution of the research itself and the outcomes that can be derived from that execution. And then, of course, managing the token, the community, the social media, like all of these other facets that Geoff spoke about. So I think right now, we are very much laser focused on the science itself and like actually making sure that the projects we funded are going to be successful, or as successful as they can be. Building things, as we've spoken about previously, like software and tools that can aid these scientists and researchers, and of course entrepreneurs, in actually executing on that research and making something successful from it. And I think that like later stage of the funnel is really where we're at the moment. So there's lots of challenges there, both systemic and individual, and we're navigating through them one at a time. But I think my focus has been on that, like, can we build things that can help people just execute or translate research more effectively? And that is, probably more than $1 million question. It's a billion or $1 trillion question, given the amount of funds that is going to research and is not necessarily having an impact or a place in the world. So, those are kind of the things I would highlight.
Absolutely. And Morgan, whilst I've got you on the mic here, and obviously at the beginning of this episode, we've also had Erik from BioProtocol discussing the BioAI Hackathon. Can you tell us a little bit more about the how ValleyDAO is integrating AI into the earlier stages of scientific research process?
Yeah. So, I don't want to sound too repetitive because I know I've spoken about this on different occasions, but I think there's several ways that we're looking at it. One is, can we use AI and these tools and just, we talk about AI, it's a big umbrella term. Can we use essentially information, and can we use it, as Erik said, more efficiently? Can we change the way we store it? Can we change the way we interact with it? And can we change the way that we present it to humans who then do their magic with that information? And so, one kind of application of that is, can we use that AI? Can we use those tools and that data or information to help people make better decisions at the earlier stages? And by better decisions, I mean, in terms of, if you're engineering a cell, which metabolic pathway to use, or what products to focus on at the end of your metabolic pathway, because those the things that you think are going to be interesting or valuable, the market might disagree with that. And then you're kind of stuck with a whole technology or pipeline that you've built towards something that doesn't even have a place in the market. So that's one kind of facet. The other is, can we use it for idea generation and even development, right? So can we take something before execution even starts, and can we riff with an AI, or can we riff with the knowledge and data that's out there to make either assumptions, hypotheses, or even just come up with creative ideas and solutions that could be plausible. So that's something we're also looking at. And, those two things that I just talked about are actually things that we've been building over the last couple of months. So, part of that experience, as Erik mentioned, UI UX is super important. And for us, that is very much the case. We're building something that is on the back end actually quite complex. I've probably lost count. In this particular workflow, we've probably got 7 or 8 different AI agents working and doing different roles within the pipeline. So if you were just to daisy chain all of this up in a chat window, it just is way too overwhelming. There's too much information streaming in both directions, and it's difficult to see, okay, how is what I'm putting into this going to turn into what I'm expecting to get out? So what we've had to do and what we've had to spend most of our time on, honestly, is designing an interface that makes this whole process intuitive, makes it something that is easily usable, and your time to value is really quick. You can immediately see, okay, this is what's happening at each step. However, I don't need to be micromanaging the steps myself. I know that if I click through all of these steps, that I'm going to get to the end result that I'm expecting. And then when you get to that end result, this is where the final 1 or 2 agents come in, because we're not just presenting a bunch of information and saying, okay, good luck. That's already pretty well done with the internet, search engines, and even LLMs, right? You can ask a question and it will pretty much reliably regurgitate a bunch of information. But then how do you use that to make a decision? And that's kind of, I think, the missing piece for us in terms of translating research. Because if you work with humans, they go out and find a bunch of information, but they don't dump that information back to you. They'll say, okay, here's what I would do with that information. Or based on the things that we have learned, here's what we think you should do. And that final piece of the puzzle is tricky. And, we're not there yet in terms of having fully automated labs that are just going to make their own decisions. But I think this turns it into something that's not just knowledge and information exchange, but actually something that feels more like a co-pilot or assistant or an assistant, that is actually helping you and guiding you on your research, and feels more like, we talk a lot about AI agents and agentic workflows. This feels more like an agent because it has agency. It's able to make decisions or recommendations for you and respond to your reactions to those. And maybe in the future, change the way in which it approaches the problem in the first place based on your reaction to the response it gives. Yeah, I've just seen that we've got a couple minutes left, so I don't want to waffle too much. But those are some of the things that we're thinking about building with AI and have been building with AI. And this weekend, we will be at DeSci London, and we're going to be doing a bit of a workshop where we're demoing this pipeline that we've been building. So if anyone is attending, we would love to see you there. And we really want to get feedback about this, especially on the UI UX, because this is something that is really going to make this from professorware into something that is actually usable, shippable software that can make science more accessible and engaging for everyone.
Absolutely. Things are happening, guys. We're cooking. Quantum Biology DAO's cooking. If you've got any questions and you want to ask them, either Geoff from Quantum Biology or Morgan from ValleyDAO, guys, please raise your hand and I'll get you here on stage. In the meantime, I've got one final question, probably going to be a short one, but it's probably also one of the most important ones that are floating around on X, on socials. Geoff, is DeSci dead? What's your take on it?
No, it's not dead. Maybe I'm not in the right circles. I haven't heard people talking about it being dead. I'm, more in contact with scientists, and the idea, compare DeSci versus what's happening in centralized funding right now. I hear centralized funding described as people in academia, you got NIH funding is getting messed up. It's people describe all this commotion. I may have heard the word bloodbath, but I don't know. Maybe that's a bunch of things happening right now. I think DeSci is really, really well positioned. And from our perspective, when we finally make it through and actually can observe the quantum effects happening in cells at room temperature for long enough to be biologically relevant and tie it to function, that's going to be such a big deal. DeSci made it possible. People are going to be watching as this happens. So no, I think I'm by the dip.
Obviously not financial advice at any point of this show, guys. Morgan, what's your take? Is DeSci dead?
Nah. To put it simply, if you are chart watching and, everything's down at the moment. So there is no optimism, I think, from a market perspective at the moment. But, we've all been here before, not just once, several times over. And the market will do what the market will do. In the meanwhile, we are striving for better things, and we are actually having an impact. So, dead things can't make that much impact. So I would say no.
Absolutely. DeSci is not dead, guys. We're here to prove it. Go and check out the latest article by ValleyDAO on whether DeSci is dead. We're actually proven with all the achievements done by ValleyDAO team in the first quarter of 2025 that DeSci is definitely not dead. It is just evolving, getting started. Researchers are providing deliverables and providing all the proofs that it is literally just a beginning. For the record, just to let you know, guys, there was a really cool article by TradingView published today. It's about mainly Ethereum. 3 reasons Ethereum could turn a corner by Kane Warwick. And he also mentions that DeSci is probably going to be in the next wave of interest and attention whenever Ethereum is going to come back from the ashes. But guys, thank you so much, Geoff from Quantum Biology DAO, Morgan from ValleyDAO, Erik, who's not with us at the moment from a BioProtocol. He's obviously very, very busy running the BioAI Hackathon at the moment. Go and check it out. That's another proof that DeSci is not going anywhere. There's more chains, more ecosystems, more people, even from the scientific world, turning their heads into DeSci because there are real results, real world impact that's happening right here in DeSci. So if you're here, you're early. Well done, guys. And that's a wrap on today's episode of Proof of DeSci. We've covered a lot from the quantum frontiers of biology to how bioprotocols rethinking research with AI agents. And like I said, what's really clear is this, that DeSci is not dead. It's evolving, and it's evolving very, very fast. So again, a huge thanks to Geoff, Erik, Morgan for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, for sharing your work, guys. This has been an absolute pleasure. And guys, if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to go and follow ValleyDAO, Morgan, Quantum Biology, BioProtocol, and stay tuned for the next episode. And of course, if you can, you should, and you can listen back to this episode and all the other episodes of Proof of DeSci by ValleyDAO on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else, basically. So until next time, guys, keep building, keep questioning, and keep proving that DeSci works. Thank you so much for being with us.